Welcome back, wonderful people. We are on video 2 for chapter 11, and we are looking at the marginal revenue product, MRP. Okay, what is the marginal revenue product? When a company hires one more worker, this one more worker is going to produce X number of additional units. So here's an example right here. You hire one person and they produce 10 units extra per shift. Let's say you hire them for a shift. Well, the price for this product is $50. Well, if the company is selling the product for $50 and when they hire you, you're bringing in 10 units per time period, well, that's gonna bring them $500 in revenue because they hired. So the additional revenue from hiring one more worker. So the thing about marginal revenue product is that it tends to decline with every additional worker. Now, it might not be quite this perfect, but this gives us a very good idea. So here's worker 1. Worker 1 is the most productive. This is the first person they hired. This person produces 5 units, which is probably why they hired them ahead of other people. The price of this product is $70, and the marginal revenue product from it is $350, meaning it's 5 times 70, it's $350. Then they hire a second person. The second person is not quite as good. Think of it this way. When a company wants to hire the first batch of workers, 100 people apply. They only need 5 people. They take whom they deem the best 5, most qualified, highest human capital. Then they need more people. Probably the same people who applied before are still around. Then they need to pick from that pool, and it's a less qualified pool and a less qualified pool, right? You can think of it as you're going for people who have 20 years experience, but frankly, they're all gobbled up. The only people who are left have less than that. Maybe they only have 12 years, so you hire them. But then they're only the people left who have 7. And all that experience is eating away the lack of experience in how many units they produce, or lack of training, or lack of education, lack of exposure, whatever the case might be. So you're hiring a second worker, they only get you 4 additional units. Their marginal revenue is $280, and the third worker, $210. Why? Because they only produce 3, etc., etc. Now, obviously, you get to a point where probably it doesn't make sense to hire this 5th worker. Now, you can hire them and you break even, hoping that maybe at some point they give you more. But you know, in reality, what a lot of people do is they have an idea of how much you should be bringing in as an employee. And if they don't think you can, they just don't hire that person. Think a little bit how this happens with restaurants, if you've ever waited tables. For instance, you know, everybody gets 5 tables, but then the restaurant, for instance, needs to give only 2 people 6 tables. They don't hire one more person for the additional 2. They just take their best 2 and say, can you handle 6 instead of just 5 tables? And they give them that extra workload. So in reality, companies have a target, or they don't know what they're doing at all. If they're a small mom and pop store, they might not even go on that at all. But that's basically what we are looking for when we are looking for the marginal revenue product. Now, the opposite is the marginal factor cost. The marginal factor cost is the additional cost from producing 1 more unit or hiring 1 more worker. In other words, the marginal revenue product is you hire them, and this is how much. You should also know it's or hiring 1 more worker, right? So what we're saying here is you hire somebody and they bring you $500 in revenue, but against it you are paying a certain wage. So a company wants its marginal factor cost to be lower than its marginal revenue product. I'm sure this makes perfect sense to you. They want to pay you less than the amount you're bringing in. Otherwise, it won't make any profits by hiring 1 more worker. So that is just an important thing. Now let's look at this table together. First thing I want to draw your attention to is the marginal factor cost here, is that it's the same per worker, which means this company can indefinitely hire the same number of workers at this wage. So this is some sort of perfectly competitive environment, because you are not paying people any differently. You're like, there's a rate, maybe it's a contractual rate, and there's a contract for everybody who gets hired, and it doesn't really matter if their skill level varies, this is what you pay. Maybe it's minimum wage rate. Maybe it's a fee, a flat fee that everyone gets regardless of whether it takes them, you know, an hour or it takes them 3 hours. There's just a flat fee, and that's the end of it. So in those situations, you have a marginal factor cost that's going to be horizontal. But here's what we are finding. So initially you have 7 workers. The total physical output is 1,000 units. This is the total. Now, you hire the 11th person. This 11th person is bringing in 111 units. The total changes to 1,111. The marginal revenue product, we're going on 6 here like the price is 6, 111 units. This first person is bringing in a marginal revenue of 666. But the second person, now they're costing you the same, but notice how, because this is marginal revenue product and marginal revenue product descends and basically starts to be less and less profitable per worker to the company, you can see how the additional units are shrinking. So the 9th worker, they bring in 104, that increases the total by less, and the next one 97, and so forth and so on. And obviously you don't hire worker number 13, because worker number 13 is bringing you less marginal revenue product than the marginal factor cost. They're actually costing you out of pocket. And that is just not something that a company would ever want to see, which is why when a company is saying to somebody, you're underperforming, we're sorry, we can't keep you, they could very well be saying, in economics terms, your marginal factor cost outweighs your marginal revenue product. Can you imagine that conversation? But that's basically where it's going. Okay, let's take a look here a little bit. Remember this one. The marginal factor cost is horizontal because everybody is costing this company the same, but the marginal revenue product shrinks, right? So here's what's happening when you're looking at. So what's going on with the wages when it comes to perfect competition? This is what's happening with the market. It has its normal demand. It has its normal supply. This is the wage at the market. And the wage from the market is picked up by the wage for the company. So if this wage is $16, that is what the wage is for this company. Notice that the supply curve overlaps the marginal factor cost. Let me take you back a little bit. If you remember, for perfect competition for a product, which is the perfectly competitive firms, this one is perfect competition for labor, for an employee. So for a product, the demand curve and the marginal revenue curve would overlap when anytime you have perfect competition, you have perfectly elastic demand. So this is a perfectly elastic supply. That's what this means. Because the supply is perfectly elastic, you are looking at a horizontal supply curve and it overlaps with the marginal factor cost. Because every time you hire an employee, see back here? Every time you hire an employee, it's the same exact wage. It's always the same exact wage, whether you have 7 or whether you have 13. And this could be indefinite. Therefore, it's going to look just like this. Now, if we were to go to the opposite of that, it would be a monopsony. So what's the opposite of a perfectly competitive market when it comes to labor? It's monopsony. Monopsony is about employer power. So think of perfect competition as neutral zone. Monopsony is the employer has a serious upper hand, because a monopsony means a single buyer of labor. Even if it's not 100% true, it might as well be. So I'll give you an example. Think of these towns that have 3 and 4 Walmarts, hardly anything else. They might have one Target in the next town. They might have a couple of local grocery stores. They don't really have a ton of competition in town. Too many Walmarts and hardly anything else. That makes Walmart a monopsony, where almost everybody in town is working for Walmart one way or another. It can be a big manufacturing plant, a big mining company, which is why when a big mining company goes out of business, sometimes the whole town dies, because they are the predominant employer. Now, it doesn't mean, like, let's say, you're taking a big mining company and it's supporting 80% of the local GDP. Well, there could be another 20% coming from the local pharmacy, from the one hospital, like maybe not even a hospital, like the couple of clinics they have, from the few restaurants, from the couple of gas stations, etc., etc. But if that company dies and most of those workers lose their business because the company leaves or shutters its doors, then those who remain can no longer actually remain, meaning the grocery store needs all those employees. If they end up going elsewhere looking for work, the grocery store also shuts down. So a monopsonist has a lot of power. Some examples are national health services, big sourcing companies, local council, local authorities, retailers such as Amazon, because they're so humongous and so dominant. So those are monopsonies, employer power. Okay, I'm gonna stop right here. We will pick up the graphs for a monopsony when we come back in video 3.